Hello everyone, how you guys doing? Hopefully you're having a wonderful day. Today we are here with a video on whether or not Messi is the Michael Jordan of soccer, a claim that's been floated out there by talking heads within the soccer space, but also I can just tell general collectors and flippers partially have sort of been using this phrase, and I've taken some moderate issue with it, which is why I wanted to go ahead and make a video about it today. To get a couple things out of the way quick, as I just sort of mentioned, the simple answer that I am going to take here is a no. Of course, this is just one man's opinion. Anyone can say what they want. I'm going to provide some examples and some stats and some different things here in terms of why I don't think that that's the case. But ultimately, everyone can come up with their own conclusions, and, I would like to hear yours down below. Of course, I do hope that you listen to the video and sort of take what I say into account. But with that said, let's get going. So, I guess to start, to sort of give myself a little bit of credibility here, my fandom has gone from many different sports throughout my lifetime. I started off early on mostly enjoying baseball. I was a big Yankees guy because my dad was a Yankees fan, and we just sort of made some connections that way and watched a ton of Yankees games. So was a huge baseball guy. Then that sort of transitioned a bit to basketball as time went on. Wasn't watching as many baseball games. I think basketball was a bit more high pace and sort of upbeat type of style that I enjoyed. Also living in Ohio at the time, we had LeBron. LeBron went to Miami, came back, all that fun stuff. So I was able to watch another sport that's going to be very relevant for this video. And then finally, within the last 5 to 10 years, I've slowly been getting more and more deep into soccer, which has led me to make this video today. So ultimately, I am someone that lives in America. I've experienced the baseball and basketball side of things, and I also now have been able to experience soccer. So I think I have a pretty good handle on this. And to add to that, I will say that this is not a diss. When I say that Messi is no Jordan, this comes from mostly the standpoint that soccer is too big to have a Jordan. That is not really possible, in my opinion. Just up on screen, you have a few examples of, some pretty monumental moments within soccer history, footballing history, whatever you want to call it, to each their own. But you get the idea. I could have put up tons of other players onto here, maybe not them lifting the World Cup, but there are definitely other players that are deserving, and there are tons of great players that have played for nations that really didn't have much of a shot of winning a World Cup, whether or not they were good enough or not. Individually, it is a team sport at the end of the day. So we'll start by talking about tier rankings or player rankings in an all-time format. I think it's very important to note that whenever you look at basketball and literally pull up any single list, for the most part, unless it's a really out there sort of list, you're going to find Michael Jordan as the number one. Here were 6 articles that I pulled up. Every single one, without question, had MJ 1, and then I think they all had LeBron 2 as well. So you can see that it's pretty consensus amongst the viewing audience who the number one of all time is. Keep in mind, there is no recency bias in that. I mean, I guess there is, in the sense that you're probably not going to see people talk about guys from the 60s or 70s because basketball wasn't really as big back then and there wasn't a large viewer base at the time. Also sort of a different league, all that fun stuff. But ultimately, the recency bias would tend towards LeBron, and that's not what you see, which seems to give credibility to that thesis. From my viewpoint, when we look at soccer, it is a good mix of Messi and Pele. That's typically the 1 and 2 you'll see. If you get into, personal lists, there will be other people you sort of see up there, but for the most part, everyone's going to have the same combination of 2 to 3 to 4 people that you see in the number one slot. I didn't want to go about finding all the out there lists with other ones, but for the most part, as you can see, Messi, Pele, 1 and 2. In some order, you'll also see Maradona sort of floated around that echelon. Same thing with Ronaldo. Cruyff's usually a little bit lower, but you get the idea. Ultimately, they are all floated around up there. I think it's much more akin to baseball. When you look at baseball, from what I could find, for the most part, you see Babe Ruth as the number one, but you will see a Hank Aaron, a couple Willie Mays, a Ty Cobb. There is, sort of a mix. And I think that that's more akin to what soccer probably is. I don't think it's a clear-cut Jordan number one, Messi number one type of thing. I think it's much more along the same lines as baseball, where you generally have all the same names floating around near the top tier, and where you rank them, how you rank them is up to really personal preference. With Jordan and basketball, it seems like there's basically no discussion to be had. Here's a fun chart that I found of popularity of sports within the United States. At the very bottom, you'll see soccer sort of getting a nice little bump lately, so that's fun to see. But The main one you want to look at here is the dotted blue line that resides near the bottom, and that is basketball. As you can tell, it was pretty stagnant at about 10% for the longest time, from the 40s until the 80s. And then going into the 90s, that's really the only time you saw any sort of growth. It almost doubled depending on the year, and you can kind of see it fell off whenever Jordan actually retired and then came right back, and it went right back up. I mean, really what this shows you is that basketball basically had the same sort of participation rate for a long time, the same viewership. The only thing that really ever changed that was MJ. So I think that really shows, I mean, it's not necessarily the most stunning of charts, but it shows that that was basically the peak of basketball. And in terms of the notoriety that it had within the States, the zeitgeist that it was able to capture, it's never really come close. I mean, nothing has, at least for a long time, to what football has. And as you can see, baseball's slowly been dwindling for a long time now. But I think that goes to show just how much MJ meant to basketball. If every other decade, nothing really happened, and then suddenly when he's there, it's able to double. That is, truly miraculous. I think that MJ's domination of his era is also something that supplants Messi. I don't think that that is really comparable, if we're being honest. When you look at the MVPs during the seasons that MJ was there, as you can tell, he's essentially the only name that appears quite frequent. Magic Johnson did appear a bit at the beginning, but that's sort of transitioning towards the end of his career. Other than that, there's really no one else in his era that seems to be competing year after year with him. And to make things even a bit more impressive, there were a couple years mixed in there during MJ's prime where he was retired, and presumably, had he played, would have been able to win maybe another MVP or two during that era as well. When it comes to NBA Finals, you can see that Jordan won 6. This all comes in the span of what is essentially 6 straight consecutive seasons with him playing. There were a couple years, again, as I mentioned before, where he was retired, but for a stint in time, he essentially dominated the league in every sense. Before and after that, not so much, but there is a pretty clear-cut time frame where he is that guy, and there's really no question about it. If we look at the number 2 of the 90s, that is Hakeem Olajuwon, and ultimately he ends up being ranked as the number 13 all-time player. Most lists will have him somewhere between 10 and 15, and so what you can see there is that during this time, Jordan had absolutely no one to be compared to. He was the face of it all, and he was that guy, right? Now, if we look at what is claimed to be Messi's domination of soccer, when you look at the UCL, I mean, yeah, you can find Barca in there. There's 1 Barca, 2 Barca, 3 Barca, 4. So a fair few. As it starts to get later and later on, he hasn't won a Champions League in quite a while at this point. Seemingly 8 seasons is the count, and within there you also can very easily tell that Real Madrid was winning quite a lot as well. Real Madrid actually coming out on top throughout all of these years that we have cataloged here, where Messi and Ronaldo were sort of battling it out. Next, we have the Ballon d'Or winners, where you can look through basically the MVP of soccer, if you want to put it that way, since we're doing the cross-sport comparison. As you can tell, of course, Messi has a ton, has 8 of them, but smack dab between there, during Messi's prime, Ronaldo is able to capture 5. And that certainly is no small feat. I think also, of course, throughout history and as time goes on, people won't talk about it as much, but for the people that truly experience that, Messi winning 2 Ballon d'Ors whilst being at both PSG and Inter Miami, it is very strange. I think most people would tell you that he probably robbed Lewandowski of the 21 Ballon d'Or, and the 23 one was essentially just given out because he won the World Cup. He wasn't spectacular in that season. He wasn't something out of this world. PSG during these years were essentially a laughingstock, and moving to Inter Miami, sure, it's cool for Americans, but that's quite a step backwards. So if we're comparing the actual peak of their career and really when they were at their prime, I mean, it's 6-5. It's really not that crazily different. Yes, the Ballon d'Or count is 8-5, but obviously within that, there is some sort of competition between him and Ronaldo. Also on top of that, again, you can go back to the later Ballon d'Ors. I don't want to talk about it or harp on it, but I do think that it's definitely a point that can be made, and probably has, some pretty good legs to stand on. And then finally, we have the goal leaders. And, you can say Messi has assists. I get that. He's going to go down as top all-time in assists and this, that, and the other. People ultimately really, really look at goals, and Pele definitely has a claim of being much higher on this list. There's a lot of goals of his that are disputed. And that sort of makes for a conversation in and of itself. But, I mean, when you look here and when people look back in history, I find it hard to believe that they're going to see that the top goal scorer all time played along Messi in the same era, and that Messi just dominated him somehow, even when that's just not the case. Not in Champions League, not really in Ballon d'Ors, and not really in goals either. And sure, he has assists, and I get that, and he's a more complete player in that sense, but I just don't think that you can claim that he dominated an era just because he won a World Cup at the end of his career, because really that's what this is all about, and that's sort of the crux that I have some issue with. I think that ultimately a lot of people, at least in soccer, are trying to make the claim that Messi is the Michael Jordan of soccer, when my question is, would it make sense to say it the other way? What if you said Jordan is the Messi of basketball? I don't see anyone saying that. I don't know why people would say that. It doesn't really quite make sense to me because, again, Jordan's almost in his own sort of level, while Messi, sure, he's great, I get it, he's a top player all time, but you can still compare him to other people, and it's not blasphemous to do so. While with Jordan, you know, a lot of people will look at it that way, that even comparing him to other people is just almost a sin in and of itself. I find that interesting. Now we'll look at it from a collector standpoint as well, because I think a lot of people are trying to push this narrative for the collector standpoint of it, because when you look at basketball, most people, at least, you know, the top dogs, are very, very heavily adventured down the Michael Jordan rabbit hole, while in soccer, you know, everyone's much more spread out because there's so much going on. And so I think a lot of people are trying to push the narrative that MJ is Messi, Messi's MJ, because they want people to really go down the Messi rabbit hole more and more. I think that from a collecting standpoint, it's so far apart at the moment. When you look at Jordan, he has 12,000 cards graded for a total of 1.4 million grades, while Messi has half the individual unique cards graded for a total of what is about 7% of the graded cards as Michael Jordan. So in terms of, you know, scaling here, I mean, Messi is on a much smaller level than Jordan. They're not really even comparable. And one thing I wanted to throw in there is that, you know, if you look back at Jordan's era, again, just to prove the point, like Hakeem Olajuwon, he's not going to have 1.4 million cards graded. He's not even going to be close. Meanwhile, when you look at Cristiano Ronaldo, he has 80,000 cards graded compared to Messi. So he has 75% of the amount of cards as Messi, and he played during the same era, and I'm supposed to believe that people don't even think they're nearly the same in terms of collectability or any of that, which is clearly not true. If this many people are grading Ronaldo's compared to Messi's, there's obviously something there, right? And so to me, that's just sort of befuddling. In relation to the Messi MJ thing, I've heard a lot of people sort of talk about this Cajun Cardboard Michael Jordan hierarchy. If you aren't familiar, it's basically a series that Brian, aka Cajun Cardboard, made on his YouTube, comparing a lot of Jordan cards with a ton of stipulations on it because, you know, it's just incredibly hard to have every card. So, you know, you really have to scale down what you're looking at. And then he went ahead and ranked them tier 1, 2, 3, 4, all that fun stuff. And people have been asking either him or just wishing that in general something like this would be made for Messi. And from my point of view, as we just sort of went through, Messi has 7 to 8% of the total cards graded as Jordan, which means he's also so much less explored, because it's not like Messi doesn't have those cards or stickers out there. They're just not delved into as deep. And the problem is people want something like this for Messi, right? They're like, what's the order? Can someone come out with a chart that tells us what's good, what's bad, and all that? The thing is Jordan's been heavily collected by a lot of people for 20 to 30 years now. I mean, it's a much more scientific process than something like Messi, where really that's only been big for 3 to 4. Even if you had someone come out with a list like this, I would very much be concerned that they are just doing their best to pump their own cards and their own incentives. Obviously, you know, everyone sort of has that risk coming into this, but at least with Cajun Cardboard's hierarchy here, he talked to a ton of different MJ collectors that are well versed in this, and maybe they have some opinions that do sort of of, pump their own bags or whatever, sure. But I would be much more weary of something like this in soccer, where it is just so much less defined. There's so many more questions, and I understand that that's why people would want something like this, but I think that it's probably much more fun to just go build your own list, chase after your own cards, and have a good time. And maybe one day you, after many, many years of learning and digging, can make something like this, and that would be great. And so that takes me to my final thoughts here. I don't want to ramble too long, but the first one is Messi's great. All right, I want that to be abundantly clear. This is not a hit piece on Messi. This is not a hit piece on Messi collectors. This is none of that. Ultimately, if you follow me, I was someone that actually was a Messi stan. I said Messi's better than Ronaldo going into the World Cup. And, I still agree with that to some extent, but I do think that a conversation can be had. Nonetheless, once Messi won the World Cup and I saw how many people suddenly shifted over to Messi being the greatest and it's not even a debate and this, that, and the other, I went the other way and said, all right, well, I'll sell a couple Messis. I still have a ton. But I'm going to go after, say, Maradona, Ronaldo, Pele, all that fun stuff. I'm going to go after the other guys while everyone's focused on Messi because of what he just did, and rightfully so, I get it, but for me, I rarely want to be on the side that, everyone's flooding towards, so that was a pretty easy zag for me. I think the biggest issue here is that soccer is too vast to have an MJ. If you know anything about basically the history of basketball, it really did have like a huge drug problem in the 70s and sort of started to come out of that in the 80s. And with MJ in the 90s, that's what vaulted it to another level. That's what brought the sport together. That's what made it palpable for a public viewing. It was everything the sport needed at the perfect time during an era where everyone still had the same channels and you were all watching the same thing, and you're almost forced to take part in this because you're witnessing greatness at the time. I also think that one World Cup should never drastically change your stance on how you rank players, especially the best of the best, because winning one World Cup is great, and for Messi it was sort of that last piece that he didn't have, so I understand why it was so important. But at the same time, no one was making the claim that Messi is the MJ of soccer prior to him winning a World Cup. I mean, it practically, I don't think I ever heard it, to be honest. But then he wins one World Cup, and suddenly he's the greatest thing to ever touch the earth. He is just an absolute god. No one could ever be as good as he is. When I don't understand. I mean, most of the other people in contention for greatest of all time did something similar. I mean, Pele won 3, Maradona won another great one in Argentina, and I think that that in and of itself is also just a funny thing I didn't even hit on in this video. But to me, I think Maradona is a much more magical player to watch than Messi. I'm not going to say that Maradona achieved more in his career, because stat-wise, trophy-wise, that's not true. But I think when you just watch players, I've watched a lot of players at this point. I've never seen anyone like Maradona, and Argentina's won 3 World Cups. Messi winning 1 World Cup was to be expected. That was par for the course. It was not some ungodly, unheard of major comeback, the massive proportions. I mean, that's what should have happened the whole time. He finally did it. Great. I'm glad for him. I'm glad for the sport of soccer. It makes for good storytelling, but I don't think that makes him the top of the top without question. And then finally, I want to throw this little jab out there at the end. I think a lot of the new Messi, quote-unquote, collectors are really just flippers. I have a pretty good nose for this at this point, being able to sniff out what's the intention of different people in the hobby. It's hard to ever truly know, but when you see enough people, you start to really get pretty good at it. So I would say that, again, pre-World Cup, a lot of people were like 50-50 on Ronaldo, Messi, and then post-World Cup, suddenly no one's a Ronaldo guy, and I find that very funny. And I think it goes to show how few people are actually just out there collecting what they want because they want it, rather than people trying to, buy up land before everyone goes and gets their own land, So, but yeah, that's it as far as my thoughts on the subject. Would love to hear yours down below in a comment. If you enjoyed, of course, make sure to leave a like. Helps me, helps the channel. And if you want to see more videos like this, as soon as I go live, make sure to subscribe. But with that said, hopefully you have a wonderful day, and peace.